they decided that they were going... or they, not that they decided, they, you know, there's a certain point in the evening where they dim the lights on the boat. So they dimmed the lights on the boat, so it was very weird. Like the ambiance of this boat changed drastically because it was like down low. And a lot of the lights were like red tinted, so it was like this weird, creepy, almost horror film lighting. And stuff was still everywhere, and it was still a mess, and we were still. But the waves had kind of not gotten to be any better. But I decided to get up and walk around and see what I could find. So I'm bracing myself on things, trying not to fall over. And I had been holding this piss for a really long time. I needed to piss for a while. I was like, maybe I can just hold out until we get to New... No, there's no such thing as holding out. It was over. Game over. It was either I was going to piss on the floor somewhere, or I was going to piss in my pants, but I needed to piss. I don't know where it was going to be, but it was going to happen. So, the bathrooms are in the middle of the ship. In here. Okay? Right in here. And this is the men's washroom. And just for purposes, I would just... These are actually, like, urinals. And then this, I'll make a solid block. Are the stalls. Okay. So I decided that I needed to go piss. It had to happen. It was gonna happen. So I get out of my chair and I relinquish the GameCube station. I haven't seen the kid in a while, so he was probably off dying in a corner somewhere anyway. And I walk over. Leave here. And I walk over to here. Now, in order to get from one section of the ship to another, you walk, like I said, the scale is all weird. You walk into here, there's this section here, there's stairs to go down to the lower deck where the cars and stuff are, then there's the bathroom over here, and there's also a door out here to get onto the deck of the ship for when, you know, it's not, you know, the perfect storm outside. And then there's also another door here to get into the main room that I didn't erase like I did over here. So... This door is closed though, and when on the other side of this door, there's like maybe a 4-inch drop that goes down before you get to the floor on the other side of the door. So I open the door, and what do I see? Obviously, complete and utter crazy. All right, there was like 3 inches of water on the floor, and I look over. And it's because at some point in the trip, somebody thought that it would be an intelligent idea to go out onto the main deck. Now, I don't know, I still to this day don't know if that person actually died, if they just opened the door, said nope, and turned around and came back inside immediately and were okay. I don't know. All I know is that there was some retard that decided that it was an intelligent idea to open the door to go out onto the main deck and had not closed it. And so, all this water had come in, because obviously the waves were high enough, had come in, and had flooded this whole area out. Flooded the washroom out, flooded this in-between deck area, in between the front and back of the ship. And I'm looking at it going, what the fuck? Really? Seriously? It's the only washroom on the ship. Okay? It's the only one, other than a private one, that only one of the teachers, Mr. Minicello, apparently spent the majority of the ship inside. And I'm going to say, probably not for fapping reasons, probably because he was puking his guts up and didn't want anybody to know about it. Because, you know, pride. But we were in, so I'm standing here and I'm just looking at it, and I'm trying to figure out if I just want to, like, unzip here, risk somebody seeing my D, and just pissing right here in this water. Because you look into the water, and it's not just water. It's water, and vomit, and piss, and everything, because it had flooded out the washrooms. And when we were going sideways into the waves are big enough, the toilet water came out of the toilets, and so the toilet water is mixed in with the seawater, which is flooding out this entire section of the ship, which is just covered everywhere. And I'm thinking, well, fuck. All I want to do is take a piss. So I said, you know what? I can't hold this. I'm just gonna have to go for it. So I step foot into it, and I kind of tiptoe around as much of the nasty as I can, and I get into the bathroom. Okay, and most of the bathroom is actually not too bad. There's water out in this main area, but the lip goes back up into the washroom, so water can come out of the washroom, but it doesn't as easily go back into the washroom. So the washroom's not terrible, but it's still like wet as all hell. And any people had gotten so desperate to find a place to puke that nobody else had puked before. It was like they were trying to be the Star Trek Enterprise, to boldly puke where no man has puked before. They had run out of stalls long ago, obviously, and they had started puking in the urinals anywhere, everywhere. It was just puke. But there was one urinal untouched. And it was this one right here. And I was like, oh, thank God. I really didn't want to have to piss on somebody else's puke. That just, you know, that's just it's the stuff nightmares are made of. So I was like, alright, I'm just going to go for it. But we were still going sideways into the waves. The waves had not really slowed down all that much. And so I had to, like, brace myself. So there was, like, a divider on the side, and I was up against the wall over here. And so I had to, in order to make this piss happen, I had to brace myself with my arm on one side. I had to use my left leg and knee and brace myself on the other side. With my other hand, I had to piss freely with no hands to help. So I had to, like, power piss so I didn't piss on myself while holding myself up because the ship was still going on, like, retarded, like, 45-degree angle friggin' sides. Just pissing freestyle, pissing in the breeze. I had to make that happen. And I totally made it. I pulled it off. I was so proud of myself. I was like, you know what? This is a life accomplishment. You can be proud of this. This is a good thing that you have done today. But right as I was finishing up and I could finally, you know, zip up and get ready to go, I heard like a moaning, like a and I was like, great, old zombies. Here we are. I just hear and I look around and I'm like, where the hell is this noise coming from? And I look, and there's one of the stall doors that were still closed. I look under and I can see feet, but they weren't you know, down like they were sitting on the toilet. They were facing up like they were facing the toilet down on the ground. So I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, I looked at the shoes. I was like, those shoes look familiar. I opened the stall door, and I'm in the men's washroom. And Jennifer's there, one of my good friends. Because apparently, the girls' side was just as bad earlier, and so she found herself in here in some weird daze, and decided that she was just going to choose this place to be her permanent camping location. So she's down on the ground, and her head is resting on the toilet paper roll. And her face is just kind of there, and you know, the toilet is just about chock full of her puke, and she's just kind of like, and like really in a whole different world. I was like, Jen, are you okay? Are you all right? And her only response was like, So it's like, all right, you know, you're still breathing, so I'm just gonna leave you be. I'm gonna leave now. So I close the door. I let her be. Apparently, she didn't really leave there for most of the rest of the day. She just kind of hung out there. Fell asleep. Apparently, after I talked to her later, fell asleep on the toilet paper roll, and never moved. But I leave the washroom. And I decide to continue on my journey to see how the rest of the ship is doing. once I had finished using the washroom there and freestyle pissing and having a great time, and finding Zombie Jen on the toilet, or next to the toilet, the waves had actually calmed down. We had finally hit calm water. We had gotten out of the storm, the worst of it was over, and it was just kind of, now we were there. It was like a normal trip now. Ish. And so I was able to go about my business and look around the ship and check on people. And so I leave the washroom, and I come back down here. And most of the people that were on the bench had, like, gone over here, this area over here, and over here as well. There were, like, booths and stuff. And they were trying to sleep. It was actually really late at this point. It was, like, fairly late in the evening. Obviously, everybody's tired as shit. All the old ladies had gone. This was pretty much a ghost town. And I just decided, okay, so I kept going. And I walked over here, and I walked into this area. Now, this area was... And again, you have to envision now. The whole ship is dark. It's almost like it's running off of backup power. There's just like those little pot lights that are running. Really just barely enough light to see where you're going. And I walk into this, and this is where all the bunks are, with the beds and stuff, where you can sleep if you want to try and sleep. And a lot of the people were hanging out here, and there was a group in particular who were surrounding this one girl. Her name was Katie. I walked in, and so I stopped. I walked and I stopped, and I looked to my right, and they're all over in here. Katie's on the bunk. Her boyfriend Casey's next to her, and there was like a bunch of people sitting around them. And Katie is pulling some sort of exorcist shit. She is violently shaking and convulsing and making weird noises like she's possessed by Satan. She had apparently vomited so much that she started getting like violent shakes. And like her boyfriend at the time, Casey, is sitting next to her, like, bawling his eyes out, like, she's gonna die, and everybody else is around just staring at her because it's like a spectacle, and Casey's just sitting there, like, holding her, rocking her, and she's shaking like she just got electrocuted by 1,000,000 volts, and she's all over the place, and I'm just standing here observing this, and I looked over and I was like, you know what, I don't even want to be part of that. I'm just going to keep moving. So I continue on my way. And I come back out here into the main area. And there are some people who have decided to try and sleep up here in the front. Just kind of stretch out on the chairs here and just try and get some sleep. And so I was tiptoeing through here. Not a whole lot was happening in here. This was actually the most normal part of the ship, and one of the only places on the ship where there was no vomit, which is great because this was one of the only carpeted places on the ship, and should there have been there, that would have been a really bad time for the cleanup crew, I'm sure. So this was actually a relatively normal part of the ship. You know, people were definitely still rough, but it was kind of okay here. And I continued my journey. And at this point in time, I realized that I haven't seen my buddy Ryan, you know, the guy who almost died from lasagna, for like the whole boat ride. We were on this boat ride for 8 hours at this point, okay? We're 8 hours into this boat ride. I hadn't seen him. And so I was like, oh, well, where the hell is Ryan? I hadn't seen him really. Where the hell is Ryan? So I continue moving on. And I come down into this area of the ship. Okay? Now, this room is what the ship referred to as the quiet room. Alright? And in the quiet room, it was almost entirely black except for some light red lighting. hot lights. The rest of the ship had, like, you know, regular colored lights. This was a very dimly lit room. It almost looked like a smoking room or something like that. Very dimly lit, and only a couple rows of seats. And this is where you would go if you wanted to if you needed quiet. Now, my buddy Ryan at the time was very much so prone to migraines. And, like, really bad migraines. Migraines to the point where he would get sick. Physically ill, like he'd puke. Which, obviously, he was already doing, so it wasn't exactly the best thing in the world. He had, of course, managed to get a migraine on this boat and was having a really bad time. So I walk in and I see him, and he's sitting in one of the chairs. And there's only a couple of people in this room. There's Ryan, there's a couple, a wife and a husband behind him, sitting behind him in the chair, and one nurse going back and forth between the two of them. And I walked into this room, and I see Ryan, and Ryan is laying back in his chair. Okay? And he's got his head tilted back. He has a face cloth over all of his face. Like a cold compress, just a cold cloth over his face. And he was as white as a sheet. I have never seen anybody as white as Ryan was at this point in time. I mean, he was as white as the background on paint right now. Just didn't even think he was alive. And his head was back, and he also liked to chew gum a lot, but he had the gum that he had was kind of chewed, and it was hanging out of his mouth just off his lip. And his mouth was kind of half open, and his head was back, and his cloth was over, so I couldn't see his eyes. And his gum's hanging there, and he looks like hell. And I go up to him, I sit next to him, and I just said, Ryan, are you awake? He kind of managed to grunt, like, ugh. And I said, are you okay, man? He didn't really respond. The nurse looked at me and said, no, he'll be okay. He just has a migraine. We gave him some medication, and he should be okay eventually. I said, okay, that's good. So I just decided, you know, I said, Ryan, do you want me to sit here with you for a while and keep you company? And he nodded. So I sat next to him, and the woman behind Ryan was still vomiting, like, nonstop. And she had thrown up so much, she got to the point where she started to bring up blood, which sounds bad, but it wasn't like a lot of blood. You know, if blood mixes in with saliva or blood mixes in with bile or anything like that, it looks like a lot more than it is. And it was most likely just her throat was bleeding a bit from how much she was, you know, yakking. And she was just bringing up stomach acid at this point. And she's bringing up blood. And as soon as she starts bringing up blood, she screams. She starts losing her shit. Oh my god, I'm dying! I'm gonna die, aren't I? I'm dying! Ah! Those were her actual words. It was just her screaming and, I'm dying, aren't I? I'm dying! And she's like gripping onto her husband's shirt and just looking at the nurse and, I'm dying! Oh my god! And she was like screaming this shit. And you know, Ryan has this migraine. And he's white as a sheet. And he's already on his deathbed. And he somehow, of course, this is not helping his migraine. He somehow works up every last ounce of energy in his body. Just pulls it all in. All the energy he has. And he lifts his hand up and he slowly peels the cloth off of his face. And the gum that was resting on his lip, he brought back into his mouth for a moment. And he slowly turns around and looks back at her. And you have to understand, you don't know Ryan. Ryan has the patience of a saint. Okay? So special circumstances when something like this happens. And he turns around and he looks at her and he says, "Shut the fuck up! You're not dying!" And then calmly turned back around. Put that cloth back on his forehead. Promptly put the gum back out on his lip where it was, with his mouth slightly ajar. And tried to get back to sleep. And I just said, okay, Ryan, I'm gonna go now. I'll come back and I'll check up on you later. But just sit tight. Just sit tight. So at that point, I continued my journey back down through here, and I decided, you know what, Adam? Maybe you should just try and sleep. The ship has calmed down. It's time for you to try and get some sleep. So I went all the way over here into one of these booths, and I tried to catch a couple of Z's. And I think I slept for like maybe 45 minutes. Finally, after 12 or 13 hours on what was supposed to be a like 5 to 7 hour boat ride, we finally get to Newfoundland. And everybody has to pull themselves up out of their chairs and get onto this bus. And we're all sitting on the bus and we've got to wait to get off the boat now. And there's this one guy, Steve, who was being a real asshat, walking up and down the aisle on the bus going, just making like gagging noises, trying to see if he could get anybody else to be sick again. And Dunbar pretty much picked him up by the back of the neck and sat him in the chair and looked at him and said, No. You don't get to do that. And we're all sitting there, and Ryan is sitting across the aisle from me. And he still looks like hell. And I feel like hell. I haven't eaten in like 16 hours. People are all feeling like shit still. We finally get off this boat with the bus. We drive to, or start driving to our destination. Okay? Or sorry, before we do that, we get out and we're at the terminal, and everybody is allowed to get off the bus just to get some fresh air. Okay? So everybody gets off the bus to get some fresh air. Now, it didn't really help me all that much. It was nice to get some fresh air, but it didn't really help me all that much. But lo and behold, Mr. Ryan takes a step off that bus, and as soon as he steps foot onto the ground, the color came rushing back up, up into it. Just whole night and day. Bam! And he was right back to normal. Perfectly fine Ryan. Not a problem in the world. No migraine, no nauseousness, no anything. Perfectly fine. He was like back to it, and he was a class jokester kind of guy. He was kind of like going around just trying to cheer people up and everything else, and just being, being Ryan. And I'm looking at him going, I walked up to him, I said, "What the fuck? Are you serious? You were the worst out of everybody, and you're gonna tell me you step one foot off, you get some fresh air, and suddenly you're fresh to seriously?" And he was like, "I don't know, man. I just got some fresh air into me, and it felt real good. It felt real odd, man. It was great." I said, "Well, I'm happy for you. I still feel like ass, but I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you." And we all got back on the bus, and we started driving to our hotel. It was morning at this point. We're in a place in Newfoundland. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And we pull up to our little, it wasn't really a hotel, it was more like just like a little roadside kind of gig. When you're out that far in Newfoundland, you're not getting like Best Westerns and shit. It's just not gonna happen. And we pull up to the place, and we see police tape, and we're looking around at each other, thinking, "What the? What happened?" what the hell is what's going on here? And so the teachers get up, and Mr. Dunbar says, "All right, guys, everybody sit tight. We're gonna go and find out what happened. Everybody sit tight. Don't worry, you'll be okay." All right, sure, whatever. People were at this point. People weren't doing too bad. We weren't feeling great, but we weren't too bad. You know, we were off the boat. We still all felt like we were still rocking on the boat, but it was whatever. We didn't care. We were off the boat now, so we just kind of sat there. And they came back and informed us of what was going on after having talked to the police and stuff that were outside the place and talking to the management and stuff. And what had apparently happened was there was an axe murder that had happened barely outside of this hotel thing where we were supposed to be staying. Just happened. Like, we're talking like a half hour or something before we arrived, some dude got hacked up. And everybody at this point is like, you know, we've almost become just complacent and just used to it. And we were like, okay, that's bad. Are we still staying here? The teacher said, yes. Everybody said, why? And the teacher said, well, you know, they're going to have police officers stationed outside and inside the place until they find the guy. And I looked at Mr. Dunbar and I said, okay, now hold on, let's back this up a bit. Let's put this in rewind for like 2 seconds. You're going to tell me right now that we just arrived post-murder, barely after this happened, and you're going to tell me that they have not found the person yet. They don't actually have the dude with the axe. He is still somewhere. He said, yes. Yeah, that's actually the case. Okay then. I'm just gonna put faith in you on this one, big guy. Just gonna put faith in you on this one. So we get off the bus. Now this little hotel, motel, whatever you want to call it, was a 2-story thing. And the bottom story had doors that went into the rooms on the bottom floor. So that you could, you know, get into your room, but then from the inside, but leave to go outside if you wanted to. And obviously, there was a bit of dismay for who was going to get the bottom floor. Because nobody wants to be on the bottom floor in an area where a murder just happened, where there are doors to get into the rooms. That's a bad time. Nobody wants that. So everybody kind of rushed and started calling the top floor, and everything just kind of rushing and everything. And by the time it had all said and done, my group ended up on the bottom floor. And I just accepted it. I was like, whatever, if I'm going to die today, so be fucking it. Whatever. So we get into our room, and we barricade the door with like a chair, whatever we had. Like, alright, sure, we feel kind of safe, but whatever. So barricade up our door, and we're in our room, and this is where people started calling home and telling their parents about what we had just been through on the boat and what we were doing right now at this hotel. Understandably, the parents were a little bit upset, let's say. And the parents started calling the teachers en masse. Now, I should say... No, I won't say that yet. That's coming up. So... So everybody was a little bit crazy. Some of the parents actually pulled their kids out of the trip. They flew to Newfoundland and brought their kids home. Some kids actually went home at this point in the trip. There was, I think, about 5 people that ended up going home at this part. But before that, we're all in our room. Parents have been called. Everybody is kind of, you know, just relaxing, trying to do some homework. We're all also watching TV, you know, trying to, you know, as this murder thing is happening or whatever, and eventually they catch the guy. And we noticed that the guy was caught not all that far away from our hotel. And so while we were relieved that they caught the thing, the fact that he was so damn close was kind of messed up. And we weren't exactly all that happy about it. But he was caught and it was over. And the cops still stayed with us for the night. And they were all still there, so it was kind of whatever. But we had survived our axe murder ordeal. That evening, after we had finally just, got to rest and everything else, and we were kind of just coming to terms with what had happened during the last 24 hours. One of the teachers decides that she wants to go moose watching, or try and find some moose. Okay, to get on the bus and go and see if we find some moose. Just about everybody told her to go take a long walk off a short pier with cement boots on, but she decided that, no, this was not a thing that you could decide whether or not you wanted to do. We were all getting back on the bus and going to go look for moose. And so we get on this bus and we start driving, and, we're in the back country of freaking Newfoundland. And somebody ends up going and using the washroom while we're on this, moose hunt, quote unquote. And we end up hitting like a massive pothole. Okay? Just a big ass pothole. And the bus does a lot of shaking and jumping. And what happened was right around before that, the bathroom had apparently broke. And so the water with the piss and everything else came up out of the toilet, hit the floor, and ran all the way down under the seats, down the aisles of the bus. And so anybody that had anything on the floor was now marked as if a dog lifted a leg and marked their territory, except it was one of the other students' piss. I was 3 from the back of the bus, 3 seats up from the back of the bus. The people at the very back of the bus had a blanket on the floor, that was now covered in piss. Other people had bags on the floor, absolutely covered in piss. Everything just piss, and more piss, and piss everywhere. And so from that point on in the trip, in which there was still like 4 days left, or more, we weren't actually able to use the washroom. Even though we had like 5-hour bus drives, we were not allowed to use the washroom. And the smell stayed on that bus forever and a day. Okay? We weren't allowed to open up the windows either, for obvious reasons. Because the last time we opened up the window broke, we were fucked. So we couldn't open up the window, there was piss all over the floor, everything was soaked, it smelled like piss, the whole back of the bus was really bad, I was at the back of the bus, so I had to get used to the smell of piss for the rest of this trip. Everything was just, it was a mess. And after 3 hours of driving around, looking for moose, not one was spotted, and we ended up going back to the hotel. Not a single god-forsaken moose was spotted. Now, at this point in the trip, with the rest of our time in Newfoundland, wasn't actually so bad. We went and saw some of the Viking places, and, did some touring around and whatnot. That wasn't so bad. Nothing else too major happened. We then had to get on another ferry to get down and to our next stop. It was much better ferry this time. We ended up taking a ferry and driving and taking, I think, maybe another ferry. I can't really remember. Stuff blends at this point. Getting to PEI, Prince Edward Island. There was only one thing that we were supposed to see there. And that was the Anne of Green Gables play. There was nothing else that we were supposed to be doing there. So, when we got there, We arrived on time. We get out of the bus. We walk to the place where it was going to happen. And what happens? The play is canceled. We are now in Prince Edward Island with nothing to do. Because Prince Edward Island isn't exactly a great destination unless you're golfing or want to see potatoes or Anne of Green Gables. So we ended up on the bus, driving around, went to like just before the bridge and hung out there and sat around for a whole day and did basically dick squat. But just take the fact that we were driving a bus that smelled like piss. After that, we simply drove home. We arrived back in Halifax, war-beaten, disturbed, distraught, scarred. Weighed a lot less, because for 2 days after that boat ride, I only ate fruit leather, because I couldn't stomach anything else. And when you slept, it still felt like you were rocking back and forth. We had seen some shit. But we made it back in one piece. And now, you know the story of the trip from hell. I hope you enjoyed it. I always enjoy telling it. But for now, it's on to the next story.